A ragged beggar sat on the grand marble steps of a lavish mansion, his back hunched, his hands cupped together as if pleading for help. Servants passed by, barely sparing him a glance. Some whispered behind his back, others sneered in disgust. A few even laughed, mocking his appearance. But no one realized the shocking truth. This was not just any mansion. It belonged to him. And the man they ignored, humiliated, and shunned was the very millionaire who paid their salaries. You won't believe what happens when the truth comes out. How will they react when they find out who he really is? And who among them will face the most humiliating consequences? Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more gripping real-life stories. This is a story of social bias, human greed, and the shocking consequences of judging others too quickly. A wealthy man puts those around him to the ultimate test, and the results will change everything. The beggar shifted on the cold marble steps, adjusting his ragged coat against the crisp morning air. The grand estate behind him stood tall and majestic, its towering gates glistening under the golden sunrise. Inside, workers bustled around, polishing, pruning, and perfecting every inch of the mansion as if preparing for royalty. But none of them knew. The man sitting hunched over, his hands dirt-stained and calloused, was William Hartley, their employer. William Hartley was a self-made millionaire, a visionary in the tech industry who had built his empire from scratch. But despite his wealth, he remained deeply private, a man who valued humility over status. Over the years, he had grown curious. How did people truly treat those they believed had nothing? Dressed in old, tattered clothes, his scruffy beard unkempt, and face dusted with dirt, William no longer looked like the powerful CEO who owned this mansion. Instead, he looked like someone who had been forgotten by the world, and that was exactly the point. He had spent years surrounded by luxury, but now he wanted to see the truth, the real character of those around him, the workers, the security, the people he trusted with his home. Were they kind? Or did they only respect wealth and appearances? He didn't have to wait long to find out. From the entrance of the estate, Charles Spencer, the head butler, strode toward the house. Unlike William's disguised state, Charles was immaculate, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the stone pathway. His slicked-back hair never had a strand out of place, and his expression carried the arrogance of a man who saw himself as the true gatekeeper of wealth and status. Charles had worked at the estate for over 15 years. He took pride in the grandeur of the mansion, not because he built it, but because he believed it was his duty to protect it from those who didn't belong. To him, appearances mattered more than anything. And poor people? They were problems, not people. As he approached the mansion, his sharp gaze locked onto the beggar on the steps. His lips curled in disgust. William watched silently as Charles's expression darkened. The test had begun. The estate was a masterpiece of wealth, marble pillars, cascading fountains, and gardens that stretched endlessly. The iron gates stood tall, a clear barrier between luxury and the outside world. It was early morning, and the mansion slowly came to life. Staff members moved efficiently. A gardener trimmed the hedges, a housekeeper carried fresh linens, and a chef unloaded expensive produce from a delivery truck. The world behind these gates was pristine, elegant, and structured. But William sat on the outside looking in. As he remained motionless on the steps, he observed the subtle differences in how people reacted to him. Some glanced at him with pity but said nothing. Others avoided eye contact entirely, quickening their pace as if his presence might stain their reputation. But then, a small moment of kindness. A young gardener carrying a heavy bag of soil paused in his work. He glanced at William and then, after hesitating for a moment, quietly placed a bottle of water beside him. No words were exchanged, just a simple act of humanity. William took note. But before he could acknowledge the gesture, Charles's voice rang out sharp and full of authority. "Get him out of here." William remained seated on the grand marble steps of his own mansion, his hands loosely clasped together, his gaze lowered. His disguise was perfect. No one saw him as anything more than a beggar. He had spent years building this estate, hiring the best people, ensuring that those who worked under him were treated well. But now he was watching them through an entirely different lens. As the morning stretched on, staff members passed him by. Some didn't even look at him, as if he were invisible. Others sneered in disgust, whispering to each other before quickly moving past. Not a single person asked him if he was all right. No one offered to help, except for one. The young gardener, who had earlier placed a bottle of water beside him, hesitated before walking by again. He glanced around, checking if anyone was watching, then quietly muttered, "Are you okay?" Before William could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get away from him!" The gardener flinched and stepped back immediately, his face turning pale. From across the courtyard, Charles Spencer, the head butler, marched toward them, his polished shoes clicking loudly against the stone path. His face was twisted in fury, his usual air of superiority now mixed with open disgust. "This is private property. We don't allow beggars here," he barked, stopping just a few feet from William. William slowly lifted his head, meeting Charles's gaze. His eyes remained calm, his expression unreadable. "I just need a little kindness," he said softly. Charles's lips curled into a cold, humorless smirk. "Then you're in the wrong place." He turned his attention back to the gardener, his voice laced with authority. "You don't encourage filth like this." The gardener looked torn, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. He wanted to protest, but knew that speaking against Charles could cost him his job. With a final glance at William, he lowered his head and hurried back to his work. William sighed internally. Fear was a powerful thing. Charles, now emboldened, stepped even closer, his expression darkening. "I don't know how you got past security, but you need to leave. Now." A few housekeepers and security guards stopped their tasks to watch the scene unfold. Some whispered amongst themselves, while others stood stiffly, unsure of whether they should intervene. William didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was, testing just how far Charles would go. Charles's patience snapped. "Enough of this," he growled, turning to two security guards standing near the entrance. "Get him off the property, now." The guards hesitated. They weren't entirely comfortable with manhandling a beggar, but Charles was in charge, and in their minds, if the butler gave the order, it must be what the owner wanted. They took a step forward, preparing to grab William by the arms. But then, the deep purr of a luxury engine filled the air. A black Rolls-Royce glided through, the iron gates, its polished surface gleaming under the sunlight. The moment the car came into view, everything stopped. The security guards froze in place. The housekeepers turned toward the driveway, eyes widening. Even Charles, so consumed in his anger, paused mid-step. A well-dressed chauffeur stepped out, of the driver's seat with urgency, quickly making his way toward William. And then, in a voice loud enough for all to hear, he said something that sent shockwaves through everyone standing there. "Mr. Hartley, sir, are you all right?" The entire estate fell into dead silence. Charles's face drained of color. William finally stood up, dusting off his ragged coat. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The black Rolls-Royce rolled to a stop in the driveway, its engine purring softly before shutting off. The moment the vehicle appeared, the energy in the air shifted. The once dismissive staff members stood frozen, their gazes flickering between the car and the disheveled man they had ignored just moments ago. The chauffeur barely waited for the vehicle to come to a stop before he stepped out hurriedly. His eyes scanned the scene before landing on the man standing at the bottom of the marble steps. His expression changed instantly: shock, disbelief, and then panic. "Mr. Hartley, sir, are you all right?" The entire estate fell into complete silence. Charles stiffened. The name hit him like a slap to the face. Mr. Hartley? That was the name of the man who owned all of this, the man who signed his paychecks, the one he had never met personally but always spoke of with reverence. Slowly, William stood up. His posture changed. The slight hunch of a beggar was gone, replaced by the commanding presence of a man used to being in charge. The ragged disguise suddenly seemed out of place against the backdrop of power. William's fingers reached up, slowly pulling off the scruffy fake beard that had helped conceal his identity. As it fell away, the truth became painfully clear. This was no beggar. This was the owner of the mansion. The realization sent shockwaves through everyone watching. Some of the staff members stepped back instinctively, their faces filled with horror. The gardener who had given William the water turned pale, realizing who he had just helped. Charles, however, remained rooted in place. His mind raced for an explanation, for an excuse that could somehow undo what had just happened. I was only protecting the estate, sir," Charles stammered, his voice strangely unsteady. William tilted his head slightly, his piercing gaze never leaving Charles. "No," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "You weren't protecting the estate. You were protecting yourself from the truth." Charles flushed. This wasn't just about what had happened today. It was about who he was. For years, Charles had taken pride in his authority, in his ability to judge who belonged and who didn't. He had built his own sense of importance around status, appearances, and exclusion. And now, in front of everyone, he was exposed for what he truly was. The other workers exchanged stunned glances, their earlier indifference turning into regret. Some fidgeted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with William. A few of them looked toward Charles, waiting to see how he would handle the situation. The gardener, who had been the only one to show kindness, stepped back slightly, his expression a mixture of realization and relief. He had helped the man who truly mattered, but the weight of the moment was far from over. William slowly turned, his gaze sweeping over the gathered staff. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others stood stiffly, bracing for whatever came next. And then, in a tone that left no room for argument, William spoke. "Bring everyone inside. It's time to talk." The heavy wooden doors of the grand hall swung open as the staff entered, their footsteps echoing against the polished marble floors. The air was thick with tension and unspoken regret. William stood at the front of the room, his posture commanding, his expression unreadable. He scanned the faces of the people who worked in his home, The ones who had walked past him, sneered at him, ignored him. Some avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably. Others stood stiffly, their faces pale with anticipation. And then, there was Charles. The butler stood near the back, his usual air of confidence now replaced with unease. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes betrayed his nerves. He knew this moment wasn't going to end in his favor. William took a slow breath, letting the silence settle before he finally spoke. This was a test. A few of the staff members exchanged nervous glances. "I wanted to see," William continued, "who among you had a true character, not when I was standing before you as your employer, but when I was just a man in need." The weight of his words hung in the air. He let his gaze settle on different individuals: the housekeeper who had turned away, the security guards who had been ready to throw him out, the servants who had whispered about him behind his back. "Some of you passed," he said, his voice firm. "Some of you failed spectacularly." A few heads lowered in shame. Others remained frozen, too afraid to react. Then William's eyes landed on the one person who had acted with kindness, the young gardener. "You." The gardener swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "You saw a person, not a problem," William said, his tone softer now. "And that is what truly matters." The gardener blinked, stunned. He had never expected to be noticed, let alone acknowledged in front of everyone. William gave a small nod. "What's your name?" "Daniel, sir." William smiled. "Well, Daniel, you showed the kind of character that this house should stand for." The room remained dead silent, everyone hanging on to his next words. "From this moment forward, you are promoted to head groundskeeper, effective immediately, and expect a significant raise." Daniel's eyes widened in shock. A few staff members gasped softly. The lowest-ranking worker in the mansion had just been given one of the most important roles. Daniel stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," William cut in gently. "Just keep being the man you were today." Then William's gaze shifted. All the warmth disappeared. His eyes locked onto Charles. The butler straightened, trying to appear unaffected, but his lips pressed into a thin line, his knuckles white from clenching his hands too tightly. William's voice turned cold. "And then, there's you." Charles didn't move. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but a faint bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "You weren't protecting this home," William said sharply. "You were protecting your ego." Charles swallowed hard. "You judged, humiliated, and tried to remove a man you didn't know, all because he didn't fit your idea of who belonged." He took a step closer, his presence towering over Charles. "Tell me, Charles," William said, his voice now just above a whisper, "do you still believe that wealth makes a man worthy?" The butler looked away. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. William didn't wait for an answer. "You're fired." Charles's head snapped up. "Sir." "No arguments." William's tone was final. "Pack your things. You will not set foot in this house again." A thick silence wrapped around the room. No one dared to speak. Charles's face twisted between anger, humiliation, and disbelief. He had spent years building authority in this household, and in an instant it was gone. The staff remained still as security stepped forward. Charles, realizing that his fate was sealed, clenched his jaw and gave a curt nod. Without another word, he turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed in the grand hall. One last time. As the heavy doors closed behind him, William exhaled. The weight of the moment had passed, and now only those who had earned their place remained. The heavy doors of the grand hall closed behind Charles, his departure marking the end of an era. The air in the room was still tense, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. The staff members who remained stood motionless, their expressions ranging from guilt to quiet shame. Some of them had laughed at the beggar. Some had sneered, ignored, or pretended not to see. And now, knowing that they had done so to the very man who owned this estate, the realization was unbearable. A young housekeeper, eyes downcast, took a step forward. "Sir, She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." William studied her for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, he replied, "But now you do." She nodded, her face red with embarrassment. Slowly, one by one, others followed suit. The security guards who had been ready to throw him out, the staff who had whispered behind his back. They all came forward, offering apologies, their voices laced with regret. Some were genuine. Others, William knew, were only apologizing because they had been caught. Still, he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he let the lesson settle in their minds. Once the apologies quieted down, William straightened his posture. His piercing gaze swept across the room, taking in the humbled faces before him. "What happened today was never about money," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It was about something far more important." The room remained completely silent. "Wealth is an illusion," William continued. "Character is what remains when all else is stripped away." His words sank deep, rippling through the minds of those who had placed status over kindness. The way you treat someone who has nothing is a reflection of who you truly are. A few heads nodded. Others looked away, ashamed of how easily they had judged. William then turned to Daniel, the gardener, the only one who had shown kindness without expecting anything in return. "You, Daniel, proved something today," William said. "You gave without hesitation, not because you had to, but because it was the right thing to do." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "It was just a bottle of water, sir." "It was a choice," William corrected. "And choices define us." Daniel swallowed hard, his respect for William growing with each passing second. The events of the day did not stay within the walls of the mansion. Word of William's test spread quickly, reaching beyond the estate and into the surrounding community. The staff members shared what happened with their families, their friends. Some admitted their mistakes, while others told the story as a cautionary tale. The local news caught wind of it, publishing an article titled, "Millionaire Pretends to be Homeless, Exposes Who People Really Are." On social media, conversations ignited. How do we treat people when we think they have nothing? Would I have passed the test? Maybe the problem isn't poverty. Maybe the problem is how we view those who are poor. For many, it was a moment of self-reflection. For others, it was a wake-up call. But for one man, it was something far worse. It was the beginning of his downfall. A week had passed. The mansion remained as grand as ever, its gates standing tall, its gardens pristine. Inside, the staff had grown quieter, more thoughtful. Change had begun. And outside? Charles stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching. He had been forced to leave with nothing but a severance check and the clothes on his back. His usual confidence had vanished, replaced by the bitter taste of humiliation. As he stared at the estate, his estate for so many years, he saw something that made his stomach twist. Through the open gates, Daniel, the gardener, now wearing a crisp new uniform overseeing the other workers, the same man he had once scolded for showing kindness. Now, Daniel stood in a position of authority. The irony was crushing. Charles clenched his jaw. The realization hit him harder than he expected. He was the outsider now, and this time, no one was going to open the gates for him. As Charles turned and walked away, William stood at the window, watching. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel anger. He only felt certainty. Some lessons in life came easy. Others, they had to be learned the hard way. William stood by the window, watching, as Charles disappeared down the road, swallowed by the very world he once looked down upon. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just the simple truth that had been revealed. A man's true worth isn't measured by his wealth, but by how he treats those with nothing. This wasn't just a lesson for Charles. It was a lesson for everyone. We often judge people based on their appearance, their status, or their possessions. But in the end, it's character that truly defines us. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in William's place? Would you have tested those around you? Would you have fired Charles? Or do you believe people deserve second chances? Let us know in the comments. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change. And this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for another eye-opening tale coming soon, because the world is full of stories waiting to be told and lessons waiting to be learned.